All right, I'm joined today by Dan Wilson of the Locked On Phillies podcast to talk some Philadelphia Phillies baseball. Dan, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me.
Of course, of course. While we're doing great, the Phillies aren't doing the same, I guess you could say very well. It's not been the start that anyone has hoped for. I think there was a lot of high hopes coming into this season. So there's been a lot of things that have gone wrong so far this year. But if you could pick one single thing and the biggest reason that has been for the Phillies' tough start, what would that be?
Well, the biggest reason, the bullpen continues to be bad, but I guess the biggest disappointment for me this season has been the lackluster offense. You know, a year ago, this offense was something you could count on. It was among the top 5 in baseball in runs scored. And this year just hasn't been there. Most recently, they've been leaving a lot of runners on base, 1 for 10 again the other night against the Nationals in that Dodgers series. It was 2 for 19 or something like that. They're leaving a lot of opportunities there. Some nights they're not even getting those opportunities. A lot of 1, 2, 3-run games. And you're having when you have a starting pitching rotation of Aaron Nola, who's having a disappointing year by his own standards, Eflin, who's good, but he's not, ace caliber. Zach Wheeler's really the only one pitching at that level. And you're filling in starts with guys like Vince Velasquez, Spencer Howard, who can't go that deep into games. You started the year with Matt Moore and Chase Anderson. Scoring just a couple runs a game isn't really going to cut it. And that's as big of a reason as any, at least for me, is why this team's a couple games below 500 right now.
How much do you think this team is missing Didi Gregorius right now? His bat in the middle of the lineup last season proved to be pretty strong. He was among team leaders in home runs and RBIs. This year, obviously dealing with that elbow injury, kind of a mystery, really. It seems like it might be a little bit of swelling in there, goes away, comes back. He starts rehab assignment, stops. So do you really think that they're really missing him right now?
It's funny you say that. So, yeah, on the surface, you say a guy like Didi Gregorius, veteran shortstop, they signed him for 2 years. You would be missing him. Ronald Torreyes has been maybe one of the biggest surprises of the season, sticking him in at shortstop. So I don't know how much they are missing him. I'm actually curious to see what happens when Didi comes back, how Joe Girardi splits up this playing time. Girardi, of course, used to manage in New York, managed both Didi Gregorius and Torreyes up with the Yankees, loves Ronald Torreyes, speaks as highly of him as anyone. I'm curious to see how they split up this playing time because Didi's under contract for this season and next, but Torreyes has played as well, if not better, as Didi. I mean, of course, we don't know what Didi would have done. Didi's an interesting case because he's had strong offensive seasons like the ones he had last year. He's also had, well below average offensive seasons. And I think he benefits from playing in a stadium like Citizens Bank Park. I think he benefited from a 60-game season last year. So I don't know. I don't look at Didi Gregorius and say, wow, that's a reason why this offense is down. I think they're missing a guy like Gene Segura more than Didi Gregorius. I think they've struggled losing time from guys like Bryce Harper and J.T. Realmuto more than Didi Gregorius. So, look, it's no knock on Didi, but I think Torreyes has actually filled that role quite nicely.
Obviously, the past few days, the game hasn't so much been in the news as much as the new rules and checking pitchers for sticky stuff and other things such as that. So one thing that has been circulating a little bit on Twitter is Joe Girardi and Max Scherzer from the other night. When he comes out of the dugout, there are no really any Phillies coming with him. Is that really a sign of anything, or are we looking a little bit too much into that?
No, I think it's a sign of look, in isolation, I don't think it's a huge deal by itself, but I have always gotten the idea with this team that, look, there's an old school, new school debate, right? A guy gets thrown out, you want to see the entire dugout fired up, running out with them, right? I don't necessarily subscribe to that. I'm 23 years old. I think it's funny when you're at a game and a bench is clearing brawl or something like that happens, but I don't usually subscribe to throwing at someone. That's not what this was. This was Joe Girardi challenging Max Scherzer, thinking that he was using some sort of foreign substance against his team and cheating and giving himself an advantage. And no one else really backed him up. Now, I've been as critical as anyone on my podcast, on Twitter, whatever the case is, that Joe Girardi has been a disappointment as manager. Now, the one positive for a guy like him, say over someone like Gabe Kapler, who was very polarizing here in Philadelphia, is that you would expect him to manage the clubhouse a little bit better. You would expect the guys to rally behind him a little bit better. And when you don't see that, you're wondering what the benefits of Joe Girardi are when he's now in his second consecutive season riding below 500 when this team is supposed to be peaking, contending for at least the playoffs, if not a World Series. So I thought that was concerning. But on the overall whole of what's been going on around baseball, I don't think it's an art. They need to nip this in the butt. Like, we can't have every single night where Max Scherzer or someone, some other pitching personality who's going to get into arguments with managers because they're getting checked every 2 seconds. I would put it in the umpire's hands, have a uniform thing. You check them at the beginning of every inning or every other inning, or whatever the case is. If you're going to leave it up to managers and give them the discretion to say, hey, I have a probable cause that Max Scherzer is going to his hair, which is ultimately what he was doing. Joe Girardi said post-game, we think he's going to his hair more than I've ever seen. Now, Girardi's seen him pitch for years, going back more than a decade, back when he was with the Tigers in the American League, now the Nationals in the National League, and he's with the Phillies, no longer managing the Yankees. He said he's never seen him go to his hair so much. And Scherzer said, yeah, because it was the only place I was getting any sweat, the only place I'm getting any moisture, and I need a grip on the baseball, and I stopped doing it. And he threw a ball in the neighborhood of Alec Boehm's head. So it's somewhat hard to argue with it when you put it like that. But I think you need to just make it a uniform thing. Hey, we're going to check you for 10, 15 seconds when you come out of the dugout, and that's it. If you can find ways to hide spider tack or sunscreen or whatever substance you're using beyond that, I don't think you can do much, because if you're going to have managers calling it out between every batter and we're going to stop the game like this and we're going to have shouting matches all the time, it's going to take away from an already slow-moving game, which is 2 games against the Nationals that took 4 hours each. It's not exactly helping the product.
Right, and you're speaking of those 2 games against the Nationals. What an action-packed series. We're speaking on the heels of a tremendous loss. 2 big blown leads in the same game against the division rival. Do you think that's something that can have an effect on this team for the rest of the season?
That loss specifically, they've had a number of brutal losses. It's not even just it's not even that this team loses. It's sometimes the way they find ways to lose games. I was at a game earlier this year. They were playing the Giants, former manager and Gabe Kapler, and Connor Brogdon comes in, allows 2 separate 3-run home runs. What was once a sizable lead goes away. I oftentimes will be watching a baseball game and saying, well, at least they have it at a slam territory. Even if they load the bases and the guy hits a grand slam, they're still in the lead. That didn't matter yesterday as we sit here and record this on Thursday. They were up 5-0. They blew that lead. Then they hit a grand slam, went up 9-5. And David Hale comes in, allows a couple runs, and allows a grand slam. They blow it again. Then the third time they go up in the 9th inning, and Hector Neris blows a lead. Like, that game yesterday was as emphatic of a loss as they've had maybe all season and maybe in the past couple of years, which is saying a ton when you think about the way this team has lost games, losing a 7-0 lead in Florida against Toronto last year, countless bullpen blown leads. One thing I haven't even touched on this year is the defense. You think back to last year when they missed a pop-up against the Orioles and ultimately cost them a game. This year, the defense has been worst in baseball. You're holding your breath every time a ball's hit to Alec Boehm. Lost in the mix of yesterday's game was there was a ball hit to center field that Odubel Herrera didn't really take charge on. It hits on his glove. I mean, it's atrocious. It is really atrocious defense. And I kind of let him off the hook earlier when you asked what's the biggest disappointment with this team so far. The offense has been really bad. I think the managing's been lackluster. The starting pitching doesn't have enough depth. But really, you could point to the defense as much as anything because they just give away outs left and right.
Heading to New York to face the Mets this weekend. Huge series. If they're not able to take a couple of these games, is it time for this front office to wave the white flag?
I mean, it's starting to feel like it, right? The organization is, I don't want to say they're stuck because you're right. This is a huge series for the Phillies. I believe after this weekend, they played a lot of games against the Mets so far. I think only 6 left after these 4 at Citi Field. You got a doubleheader coming up tomorrow. You got a Saturday game. You got a Sunday game. Splitting 2-2 doesn't catch up any ground. This team has been pretty bad on the road so far this season. You say maybe they just have to find a way to get 3 or 4. It almost seems like a bit of a lofty goal, but I just don't know where else you look at this. But in terms of waving the white flag, I don't even know what that would look like. You have Bryce Harper in year 3 of a 13-year contract. He just signed J.T. Realmuto to a 5-year deal. You have close to $450 million committed to the 2 of them. I don't even know where you're not going to start selling at the deadline, short of Bryce Harper a couple of years from now, requesting a trade out of Philadelphia, which, by the way this track of this Phillies team is going, I don't want to start any rumors or anything like that. I have no probable cause to say that. It just feels like that's where this thing might be headed. Like he was really advertised that this baseball team was going to be a lot better. And we all expected this team to be a lot better at this point of his contract. And it just hasn't been. They struggled to keep their head above 500 in basically all of these seasons that he's been here thus far. So yeah, you could say maybe they would wave the white flag. Maybe they won't be as aggressive at the trade deadline, but frankly, I don't know if they can really afford to not be aggressive at the trade deadline because they don't have their minor league system is not very good. So maybe try and get a few prospects that are a year or two away and start looking ahead towards next year. But I don't expect this team to tear this thing down and build for 5 years from now. They're just not in position to do that.
So you kind of led to where I was going next, which is trade deadline and what Dave Dombrowski should do. You're talking about, it's going to be hard to sell off veterans. And I agree, Gene Segura is probably maybe your most valuable one. He's the one who's possibly going to be an all-star this year, but he has quite a bit of money still owed to him. And it's going to be a negotiating issue for some teams. Like you said, Didi Gregorius, he's been hurt all year, still has another year left on that contract. Archie Bradley, only 1 year deal. If you're really waving the white flag, maybe that's somebody like that to go.
Yeah, again, they need relief pitching help. Now, Archie Bradley hasn't been great this season. That's actually one of the reasons, we haven't gotten into a closer spot, and I won't go off on a tangent on that just yet. But Hector Neris, who's obviously been disappointing, has been really disappointing of late, blowing save after save after save. I've been a huge fan of Hector up until, basically very recently, and I haven't totally jumped off yet because I don't know if they have a better option to close games in their bullpen, which is more of a testament to the team and the organization as a whole than it is to Hector Neris. In terms of what you sell, yeah, you're right. You might be in a situation where you say Gene Segura had an all-star first half. We have to give him away for a guy who's ready next year. I just don't even know where else you look. You look at around the field. Look, you have Bryce Harper in right field. He's under – that's like an organizational changing thing. They're not going there yet. Realmuto, they just signed. Maybe Rhys Hoskins is a guy you look to trade. You have – basically, the saying is they have a DH playing first base and a first baseman playing third base. So you move Alec Boehm over to first base. You try and sell off Hoskins for some value. Segura has value. I don't know if anyone's really interested. Ronald Torreyes has played well, but I can't imagine you're getting a huge return on him. McCutchen is kind of, he's on the older side. He's in the final year of a bad contract. You're not getting anything for him. Odubel Herrera has certainly had his off-the-field issues, but he's having a pretty good season. Maybe someone calls about him. I don't exactly know where you go with this, but Hoskins actually might be the most intriguing name to some. He's still under club. He came up in 2017, so he has, 18, 19, 20, a couple more years of club control. He's a streaky hitter, but someone might see some potential and value there. He might be the guy you start hearing in the mix, and he's a guy that Philadelphia fans have come to like, especially when he's hitting well, but you can't just sell off someone when they have no value. You have to try and get something in return for him. So yeah, someone on the right side of the infield, Hoskins, Segura could definitely be the possibility, but they haven't shown any signs that this team is looking to sell right now. Their goal right this season is to make the playoffs. Now you're right. Maybe losing 3 games in New York this weekend or a bad July might dictate that. Bryce Harper talking post game yesterday, basically that they have to prove to Dave Dombrowski that it's worth it to make some moves at the deadline. And so far this season, they haven't, but the state of the organization kind of dictates that if they have any probable cause to make any moves at the deadline, if they're in it remotely and no one's run away with this division, the Mets sit in first place right now. So it's a good opportunity to make up some games against them. They're going to go for it just for lack of a better option.
Right. And let's talk about that. So let's see, the team's going for it. I would, and like you're talking about, the minor league system is not full. It's not a full cupboard. So you're not bringing back a huge addition. What minor additions do you think that the Phillies could make? I have a couple names that I want to throw out there after you to see if you'd be interested in them. And I know some former Phillies fans probably would be as well.
So I'm sorry, you're saying minor league players?
I'm sorry. What minor additions do you think that this squad could make at the trade deadline that are actually going to prove to be helpful?
Across the major leagues?
Yep.
It's a good question. I haven't fully, dove into, trade deadline news yet, to be honest, just because I don't know exactly where this team is going to be or how big they're going to look to add. But in terms of need, they obviously still need a couple of bullpen arms. I don't think this is a case where you say they're a closer away. They have bigger problems than I think the closer spot, if I'm being perfectly honest. They could use more relief help. But sometimes you look at a team that's ready and you say they keep blowing leads in the ninth inning. That's what needs to change. I don't think if Hector Neris was an all-star this season, that this team would be in first place. I think they have bigger problems than that. They could look to add, someone who could play defense for sure, but you add another bat in that lineup, maybe another outfielder, because McCutchen can't play every day and he's had his struggles this season. Another starting pitcher for sure. You'll start to see names popping up on teams who are struggling. I'm trying to think who, just running through the names in my head, and you'll say something, my face will blow up or not, but starting pitching, I might label as the biggest need for this team, because you just can't. Velasquez, they're in year 6 of him. There was like a month there where he looked like he was better. He had another lackluster start yesterday. Spencer Howard not going as deep into games as you need to. Now, they've actually done okay with this piggyback approach they've been doing, where it's him, then Ranger Suarez or Bailey Falter. But that's taxing the bullpen for later days. So I would say starting pitching, an affordable starting pitcher, you're not going to, again, sell off too much for him. But an affordable starting pitcher to kind of round out this rotation with. I was the one kind of screaming all offseason. I would have rather than gone after someone like James Paxton or a Jake Odorizzi, as opposed to filling it out with Matt Moore and Chase Anderson. Between Matt Moore, Chase Anderson, and Vince Velasquez, they have $11 million committed to those 3 guys, and they have given you very, very little value. So that's been as disappointing as anything for me.
So for me, the 2 possible, and we're talking minor additions here, so it's not going to be an earth.
Yeah, and that's the other thing, is how you can make minor additions. Is it going to be I don't know if this team can be fixed in the trade deadline,
right?
Which is the God's honest truth, but you hope that it puts them in better contention than they are right now.
The one thing I've been seeing floating out there on social media is old Philly Cole Hamels is getting ready to throw a showcase, hopefully in the next month or so. Do you think that's something that this team could consider?
Look, I loved Cole Hamels when he was on the Phillies. I hope he proves me wrong. I hope he has a major league career. I think this team, I don't think it's necessarily in the best interest of this team to go add Cole Hamels. He hasn't been pitching in the majors all season for a reason. This is not 24-year-old World Series MVP Cole Hamels. It would be a nice story in his first few starts. People would come out, everyone would bring the Cole Hamels jerseys out of the closet. But by the time we roll around to September and he's allowing 5 runs in a start, it's not going to be as funny anymore. One under talked about story about the potential Cole Hamels reunion that often I think goes under the radar is that him and Bryce Harper do have history. Remember, he threw at him when he was in Washington, and Bryce Harper took exception to that. Now, Bryce Harper is a more mature player now. That was years ago. I don't know if there's still beef there, but if Bryce Harper, rather, there's any ounce of a doubt that Cole Hamels should be on the roster, like, they're not going to go sign Cole Hamels. But even aside from that, again, cool story. I hope he signs somewhere. I hope he proves me wrong. We can look back at this and say, yeah, he didn't think Cole Hamels would give anything, and now he's pitching in the postseason again. I just don't see it. I think this is, Father Time is undefeated is an old time cliche. He hasn't been pitching for good for him trying to get back in the majors. Maybe he can help the team out. Maybe he can pitch on the minors, make a few spot starts for someone. But this team is not going to fill any voids by signing Cole Hamels.
The other one I'll float to you is former Phillies left-hander Jay Happ out there in Minnesota. The last year of his deal. Was that something that you think that they could be interested in?
Yeah, more so than Cole Hamels. Jay Happ is an interesting case. I just mentioned the World Series team. I don't know who would have bet that Jay Happ would have been the last guy left from the World Series team. He's been a pretty solid pitcher for a very long career, and I don't know if anyone necessarily saw that coming. And of course, it depends on the ask. I was looking at his numbers earlier in the season. I'd have to refresh myself with the kind of year he's having thus far. I'd be more interested in him. The guy's actually, pitched in the big leagues more recently, could be on the block. You're right. Minnesota is a team that would make sense to try and sell someone off like that. I'd be more interested in J.A. Happ than Cole Hamels. Again, what are you going to get out of J.A. Happ that's going to affect this team for the final? And that's the other thing about the trade deadline just as a whole. Let's say they make a move in July. You've been 500 or, ducking below 500 for 4 months. They need to have a really solid July to put themselves in a position that someone at the trade deadline could impact them for just 2 months. They're not going to get a full season with them. They're going to get August and September out of whoever they go add. I'd probably rather J.A. Happ start games than Vince Velasquez. I've just seen way too much of it. I'd rather J.A. Happ start games than Matt Moore, like we're going to see this Friday in New York. I'd rather see Vince Velasquez start games than Chase Anderson. Do I think J.A. Happ is putting this team over the hump into the playoff? Probably not.
So your gut, what is it telling you is going to happen in the next few weeks before the trade deadline? The Phillies going to get hot?
They got hot at the beginning of June, then it kind of died down. It's really, I have some friends and even myself too. Obviously I'm watching the team day in and day out, talking about them on Locked On Phillies. And I'm just, a diehard. It doesn't really matter how they're playing. I'm locked into it. But for a fan on this team, it's really hard to buy in because even at the beginning of June, like you could feel it. Anyone who's been watching this team all year knows they've gone on these hot streaks before. To start the year, they went 5-1. Then the beginning of May, they got a little hot. Then the beginning of June, it's almost like every month they have a little bit of a resurgence, and it's usually a homestand. And then they go on the road against LA and San Francisco. And again, those are two really good teams. So you're not expecting great results, but they go 2-4, and they leave a ton of runners in scoring position. Then they come home and lose to the Nationals, who are now have now surpassed them in the division as a result. No, maybe they get hot, but not to the point where I'm like buying into this team. I need to see it way more sustainable over the course of the season. I have way too large of a sample size at this point. While I'm sitting here, they're 34 and 37. So we have watched, I'm doing some quick math here in my head, 69 games so far. I don't think that was correct, but we're sitting here almost 3 months into the season, and they haven't shown the ability to consistently do anything but, one step forward, 2 steps back. They'll get above 500 for a day. They'll lose a couple in a row. They'll win 7 of 8 or 6 of 7 to start a month, and then go on the road and lose 2 or 4 of 6. I don't know how much you can buy into this team when they consistently do that. I think they have way too many holes on this roster. I hope they get hot. I hope they climb back above 500. Then you have to maintain that. You have to consistently win 2 of 3. You can't win 2 of 3 just to lose 2 of 3. It totally undoes the entire equation. I know it sounds so basic, but look, I hope they do get hot. It's just very hard to buy in. If they do it for a full month, you'll see some interest gain. But until then, it's very hard to buy into this team right now.
Phillies are heading to New York to face the Mets this weekend. We're going to stay with Locked On Phillies all season to keep up with how the team's doing and all the latest developments. And you can hear Locked On Phillies anywhere you get your podcast. Thanks, Dan, for joining us today.
Yeah, of course. Really quick, I was going to say, so 34 and 37, I can do math, 71 games they have played this season. So we're coming up on the midway point. We've seen a lot of baseball to this point. It's really frustrating to think that one little stretch is going to turn the course of the season. Sometimes it has. They've had little sparks so far this year, but it really hasn't proved to amount to much of anything. But thank you so much for having me. This was definitely a good time.